Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ruck Up Buttercup. We're glad to have you guys here, and we have an amazing guest with us, someone that we've talked about their resource multiple times on the show. So we're really excited to have them here to explain a little bit. And we have the amazing Jessica Hall. She's here to kind of give us a little bit more information about their program. So she's going to talk about United Through Reading. Jessica, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Jessica Hall. I am the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at United Through Reading. I'm an Army spouse, and we have three kids, and we are currently stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland. Anything else?
Yeah, yeah. So we like when we have other military spouses, that's kind of like all the people that we have on our show all the time. So it's really nice to kind of hear your story as well. So if you wanted to tell us a little bit like how you met your spouse and how your journey through this whole lovely military life we all live.
Yeah.
But I just love how you just kind of smiled about like, is this a good story of how you met your husband? Because you just kind of like smiled like, oh, I don't know if I should share this.
I mean, it's your typical met in college story. So we met when we were in college. I went to NYU in New York City, and my husband went to West Point. So I met on one of his like rare outings. Like they don't let them out a lot as cadets, if you're familiar with the military academies. So I met on like a rare outing for him. But so anyway, we dated all throughout college and then got married shortly after he graduated. And I had graduated the year prior. And then from there, so that was in 2011, we got married. So we will have been married for 13 years this summer. And we have lived in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos in Texas, Fort Knox, Kentucky. He went to grad school in Northern California, so we lived in the San Francisco area while he did that. And then now we're at Fort Meade. Along the way, he's deployed 2 times, done, name all of the trainings and things that they do along the way. And like I said, we have 3 kids. They are 7, almost 5, almost 2. Though we didn't have our kids right away. We got to enjoy that like dual income, no kids life for a few years. And then I've also been really fortunate to find work pretty much the whole time we've been married. That's something I'm personally passionate about, is military spouse employment. I think it's such a huge issue that we all face. Like, how do you preserve your own sense of self and maintain your career if you want to along the way? So I've been really lucky to have hybrid or remote and in-person positions, all of the above, throughout our time as an Army family. And that's really important to me, and always been in the communications world. I graduated from college with a journalism major, but then kind of switched over to the marketing side while we were in Washington when I got my master's degree there. Just found it a little bit easier to find jobs and keep my career progression going by switching to that. And so I've been really lucky to pretty much work for most of these, what did I say, 13 years almost, and with some little breaks here and there, but it's been fun.
That's great to hear that you have a job. I mean, that's one of the, we do talk about that with a lot of our spouses, is the struggle of just like not being able to find, especially the ones that have gone to college. I think that's super frustrating when you have a degree and you're like, I can't use it because I can't get a new job every 3 years. So it's good to hear that you were able to kind of like shift and find a way to make it so that you could work.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, United Through Reading, we've talked about it a couple of times on the podcast. We at Deployed Love have worked with United Through Reading a couple of times. They do sponsor a lot of books that we give out at our events, and it's been really nice to see how it interworks with our organization as well. But if you could kind of give maybe some of the newer spouses that are listening to this a little description of what United Through Reading is and what they do.
Yeah, so United Through Reading was founded in 1989 by a military spouse in San Diego, and she was also a reading specialist. And it started with, I mean, if you're a brand new military spouse, you may not remember VHS tapes, but for us more seasoned folks, they literally took giant video cameras down to the piers in San Diego with those VHS tapes in them, recorded sailors and Marines getting on the ships that were going out and for underways or deployments, and handed their family a book and a recording to watch while they were away. And we've been doing that ever since. The technology has obviously changed. We now have a free mobile app, so you can make those recordings on your own mobile device and then upload it and store it in the cloud through our services. All of it is free. You can request a free book through our app web viewer, or if you're at an event like one of your guys' events, or are connected with tons of commands and community centers. So your service member could walk into a location, make that recording, and walk home with the book, and the recording will be emailed to them. We're also on board a lot of the Navy ships. And so unfortunately, due to connectivity on those ships, they're still a bit old school. The recordings are still made on an SD card. But you can still upload those to our app after you get it. That's kind of my hack that I've done with our old recordings that my husband made before the app. So that's our primary program that you'll find us in. And the way to really help your family stay connected during those times apart, whether it's deployment, training, an underway, a TDY, geobatching, you name whatever reason your spouse isn't home for story time, and we're there for you. My kids have watched our United Through Reading recordings when my husband was mowing the lawn outside of our own house and we were inside the house. So, whatever the reason that your kids want that spouse, we're here for you. We also have a number of resources on our website to help you maintain or start your reading routine. So reading trackers, tips for the parents on how to read stories together, build that reading comprehension. And we also have a podcast, a limited series podcast, so not released all the time like yours is, but you can still access that to hear from some great literary experts and authors, staff members, to just get some tips on why reading's important and why it should be part of your daily routine.
We are both avid readers.
We're avid readers for sure. And I didn't realize this program has been around that long. But when you mentioned the videos and things like that, I'm like, oh yeah, I actually remember that. But I, for some reason, didn't realize that the program had been around so long. And that's just a testament to how great this program really is. Because like we said, we've had books given to us to give away. And I love the recording part. I think that's just a fun way to keep kids connected to their service member.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things because you just see, and like I said, our family uses them as well. So when we use it and my husband's away, my kids get that time with their dad, because we know that during deployments or trainings or whatever takes them away from the house, it's hard to find that time to actually call them. And so people are like, well, why don't you just use FaceTime? It's like, because FaceTime doesn't always work. Have you tried to FaceTime with a toddler ever? They're running around the house with you get motion sickness, right? And they only have a 10-second attention span. If you put on a video of mom or dad reading, then they're captivated. And we all like to say, United Through Reading, it's good screen time, right? You try to limit your screen time as much as you can, here and there. No judgment on what your screen time limits are in your house, but you're reading a book, and the thing about reading together is it builds an emotional bond. And so whether you're doing it, and what we hear from our families is that if you're sitting there doing it, you have that bond. If you're sitting there watching the video with the book, you still have that bond. So it just maintains that connection, which is really important, because I think that's a big fear of long deployments. It's like, what's going to happen when they get home? Reintegration is really hard. And if you add on not really still being connected to that mom or dad that left for 9 months or longer, that's an added layer of stress that we can try to alleviate, at least.
The recordings are great because I feel like if your child is having a breakdown at 3 o'clock in the morning, this is something you can do. You can't always call your spouse, even if they're stateside and they have good connection. You can't always call your spouse. They need their rest in between training and stuff like that. So to be able to be like, okay, we're not going to call dad, but he's going to read you a book. Here, let's just read this book again. And then I also think it's that routine of it, especially if you just have 1 or 2 recordings of the same books, that the kids can kind of memorize those words, and they know what's going to come next. And it's kind of, toddlers need routine, and I remember that very much when my kids are that age. Like they need something that they can look forward to that's consistent. So
Exactly. And your kid already is going to want to read the same couple books over and
They
over
do.
again. So, if it's on the app, it saves you from reading that book again.
Yeah. So my 12-year-old still wants to read the same books over and over again. I'm like, dude, you have the whole library. You could read any of these books now. You have an adult reading comprehension at this point. Like, please read other books.
Yeah, but we're laughing about this, but like how many books have we reread because it's just like a comfort, like how much we enjoyed it. We just want to relive that experience. Now ours take a lot longer to reread. My kids do the same thing. They just want to reread books over and over and over again. And I'm like, I'm so tired of this story because I still have to read it to them, at least to my youngest. But they're just like, it's such a good story, Mom. And I'm like, okay.
And there's nothing wrong with it. It's
No.
actually great for their reading development. And, research shows that it's not a bad thing. But as the parent reading it, sometimes you're like, can we please read any other book from this bookshelf? But it's really good for their brains. But it can be hard. So just make your spouse make a recording and then they can read it over and over again. Life hack.
Really
The best.
Especially if you were able to get that book before they leave. Like you're saying, some of the events that you guys are at are going to be like those pre-deployment meetings and stuff that they have pre-deployment so that you're available and work, especially when they're working with specific units. If you have someone in your area that through United Through Reading that's like working with those units, then to have that and then be able to read it like maybe the first 2 nights before they leave, I think gives them that connection of like, oh, this is the book that's Dad's book. Right. And so then when they're like, oh, we're going to read Dad's book and pull that book out again, it's going to feel like, oh, we're connecting a little bit better. And that connection you were talking about is the hardest part, especially with young kids. They don't even realize, I mean, I hate to say that they don't realize it, but they do realize that their dad's gone, but they don't realize how long they've been gone and things like that. So I feel like that connection changes a lot, especially with younger kids. Like it's not that they don't miss them, but time goes by fast and they don't really realize that time is passing. And before they know it, that like closeness has kind of like dwindled off and they're like, oh, this person, I know him, and it's just like, I mean, I guess it's kind of anything in the military. My kids, even every time we go back to see grandparents, because we only see them once a year, it takes them a little while to like open back up and be like, oh, okay, I do know these people and I love them. So deployments make that really, really hard, I think, because that's their dad or their mom that they're having to like only see once a year kind of thing.
Oh yeah. And I love you said your idea for doing it ahead of time. And I always tell people try to make as many recordings as you can before you leave, because one, you never know like exactly when they're going to leave and it's going to change 8 times. And so if you have those recordings there already, then you're ready to go from day 1 when that real emotion of missing them is at its height. I mean, it's going to be high throughout, but there's something about those first few days that are the hardest, I think. And so if you've made those recordings ahead of time, maybe you've read the book together, then you can just start off day 1 of deployment with the recording and then just go. It's already there for you.
Yeah, it's such a cool program. I mean, like I was saying, Ashley and I love reading. We're like all about books, and I am a huge fan of anything that establishes relationships with books, because that's like we've talked about doing book clubs with like not my grandparents, but my kids' grandparents with the kids, because my mom also loves to read. And I was like, this would be a different fun way to establish a book club type thing as well. So yeah, so we love reading, and I think this is just
I love
the
that
coolest
idea.
way. And I was like, she's always like, well, I don't know what to talk to them about when they call, right? Like, I love to talk to them, but they're kind of all over the place. And my kids aren't even little anymore. They're big, but like you're saying, they're just kind of running through the screen, yelling at each other. And you're like, well, this is going great. She's like, well, I wish that we had like a reason to sit down and talk. And I was like, yeah, well, I think that if you pick a book that's like in their range, something that they're going to be interested in, and then we can all read it together, and then, every week or 2, sit down and just talk about something specific. I feel like that's
and it opens the door, right? At least. Yeah,
you could do that with their dad.
Conversation.
Like, we read this with you. Now let's talk about it in the next video call. So some like actual connection where it's not just like, hey, Dad, look at my shoes, look at my hat. Like,
Yeah, and we have our program has books for 0 to 18. So I think you see the most people using it with the younger age kids, but
Mhm.
we see those with older kids reading chapter books with them, and
That's cool.
there's a lot of ways you can do it. And my husband has started to do it. Our oldest is in 2nd grade and starting to read chapter books. And so he'll read a chapter and then, they can talk about it afterwards on the phone. We have, as they get older, we've had families tell us they alternate chapters. So like they'll read one chapter on the app, then encourage the kid to read the next, and then they come back to the app to read the next one. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's then the next time when you do get to FaceTime or you do get that phone call, there's a starting point to talk about. It's not just, oh, how was school? Because that's going to be their
Yeah.
answer. Like, or I don't remember. You can say, what
Yeah,
happened
I
in the
don't remember.
book?
I
Yeah,
love
I
that.
don't know what I
not
did
know
for
that it's
8
chapter
hours
books.
today.
That's
But-
so cool that it goes for the older age, because I feel like a lot of resources that we do find are a lot more for the younger age, and that's
Yeah.
really that connection for throughout high school even would be really cool.
Yeah, so you can definitely still use our program, and our book list has over 400 books, and it includes chapter books on there. So whatever your kid is reading, whatever the age, we have something for them, because it's still important to read with your kids as they get older. Even as they're learning to read, you want to read out loud with them. And then at a certain point, you probably more transition to like that book club type idea where you just ask them what happened in the book and maybe read it with them. But you can still definitely make the recordings. You're going to be there for a while. We did have we have spotlight stories in our app, which is a special reader reading like a book, and it's usually like themed. So we'll have books for like the holidays or whatever. But we've had someone donate their time to reading Harry Potter, and those recordings are really long because those chapters are really long. But it's still, if you have the time to do it, it's totally worth it.
I think that's super cool. I'm just thinking about like how can we use this, because that would be such a cool thing. But Dustin doesn't really deploy very much anymore, thankfully, in this new job. So, but we homeschool, so we do a lot of read louds, and I think my daughter will want to do it until she's old. I mean, I listen to audiobooks, so I feel like it's the same sense of audiobooks, right? So we're able to sit down even on
Could
car
you
rides and
imagine
listen.
Jeremy's voice?
Yeah.
He's
See,
got
maybe I'll
such a
take my
deep
husband reading
voice.
ebooks.
I'm gonna
Oh,
have to,
I love it.
I'm gonna have to request some books, because we've actually not had any of the recordings from you guys. So I was just thinking, I'm like, that would have been great to have last month when he was gone. So I'm like, I'm gonna need to request a couple, but just he has such a deep voice that like, let him read Harry Potter to me and I'll just be a happy little camper for forever.
Yeah, and I've talked to some families, they do incorporate it into their homeschooling. So for their read alouds, so that, mom's homeschooling, dad's at work, but he's the one doing the read aloud, or allows them to kind of switch off which kid they're focused on because they're reading with the United Through Reading app. So if you try it out, let me know, because I
might do that. Is there like a limit on how many recordings you can make in the app?
No.
Oh, see, that will save me time during the day. Sitting like,
Yeah, you can make as many recordings as you want.
Read this book.
And the cool thing with the app is that every time you make a recording, you can request a new free book. And so you can keep getting those books. So whether you're picking a book off your shelf or if you want to try something new, we have, like I said, we have over 400 books that you can choose from. So it's a lot.
It's a great resource, because we've recommended, like, during deployments, like how to stay connected with your service member and like spouses reading books, but like that's just a great way to keep your kids connected. Because I know my kids, when my spouse is gone, getting them to connect is just kind of almost non-existent. Like they don't want to sit down and talk, like we said a little bit ago. They don't, and then when they do sit down to talk, it's just kind of like meh. Like there's really no connection or anything like that. And so like the last 2 weeks of him being gone last month, like they really didn't even talk at all. Like it was just like, hi dad, bye dad, literally how it was. And I was just like, we need to figure something out. And like they love their daddy dolls, so like when they're gone, they have their daddy dolls. But having that, like Claire coming up to me and saying, hey mom, can you read me a story? I'm like, well, how about you go get the book daddy recorded to you? You read that while I do X, Y, and Z. Because us busy moms, like that's also a great way to kind of help with that time routine, is like, hey, go listen to your story from dad or mom. And that way I can get brother into bed or vice versa. And so, because she likes to follow. So she's like a little
Mhm.
shadow directly.
I have one of those.
And I'm just kind of like, just go sit down. Like just go sit down. I'll be right there. And I think that like having something like that where she could go and sit down and just listen to daddy's voice, even if it's a late night, like dad's in the field, dad's working late. It's such a great resource. And I really don't think everyone knows about this. Like, even though it's been around for so long, the amount of people who are like, who've come to our events who've been like, who's United by Reading? Like, who are they? And we're just like, oh, it's a great resource. Let's tell you about it. Here you go.
I think it's also one of those things like maybe you heard about it on your first deployment and then time goes on and
Yep.
you forget about it because there are so many amazing resources in this space. It's hard to keep track. Like some of my friends and I talk about that all the time. We're like, oh, remember you can use this. And it's like, oh my God, of course. And like it comes back from the depths of your memory somewhere. And so I think, you know, I was just talking to someone and they shared it with a friend and they were like, oh, I do remember hearing about that, but I didn't have kids. So I didn't like think
That's what I
about
was gonna
using
say. It's like
it.
one of those resources that you don't really need until you need it. So like you hear about it when you're younger, but you kind of are like, yeah. But now that
Yeah.
we're talking about it, I'm like, I wish I'd have used it when I was younger because I would have loved to have had a video back. We were back in the 2010 whenever they deployed in 2009. I don't know. Like to have had a video that every night he could have read me a story when I was sad being apart because when you're young and you're like in your first deployment and stuff like, and we didn't have the ways to video call very easily. We didn't have ways to just call. So like I would have loved to have had a video of my husband where I could have just sat at night and just cried and like watched him read a book to me.
I'm trying to rack my brain to see, like, because I mean, it's been around a while and I grew up military. I'm a military brat. And so I'm trying to rack my brain of whether or not my dad did something like this. I can't remember.
Chris Branch was he?
He's Army.
So we started off really a Navy focused program, just being from San Diego, and we didn't really expand until all the service branches until much later into, you know, the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan in the early 2000s. So likely not. I'm judging you based on what you look like on the Zoom, but you look about my age.
I was a high schooler after 2000. Graduated in 2007. But I would have loved that. I would have. My dad was deployed pretty much all 7 years between 2000 and 2007, give or take. We were stationed separate. And I would have loved to have been able to read with my dad because me and my dad read a lot together. Like that was kind of one of our things. Reading and running were our things to do together when he was home. And that would have been so fun to have him read, recording it, or I don't know. I mean, I was a lot older, but I was a daddy's girl. So it was one of those things where it would have been just super cool to have like that. And as a military brat, I'm saying that this program would have been really cool to have as a kid.
Yeah, no, totally. And for those that were lucky enough that I'm about the same age as you, like to have it then, they've loved it. I've met someone that is a naval officer. His dad used the program when he was a kid. He was also in the Navy. And then now he's using it for his kids. So it's the grandkids. But the other cool thing is that our program, I said we're open to all branches of service. We're also open to veterans. And so as long as you have served and you can verify your service through ID.me, you can log in through the app. So like your dad could still use it and send recordings to your kids.
Oh, that's exciting because he actually doesn't live stateside. He lives in Thailand. So that would be really cool if he wanted to do that.
And there's ebooks on the app, so you don't have to have a kid's book like with you, because that's probably harder for like our grandparents particularly. Or you can request when you first sign up. If you don't have any recordings, you can still request one free book to get you started. But it's just a cool way. You know, we define family how you define family. I have a coworker who sends recordings to her granddaughter or her goddaughter, nieces, nephews, all of that. So the person making the recording has to have military service, but the receiver can be anyone.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we want to make it as accessible as we can to our military connected families. And with our app, we can now do cool things like make sure it's readily available for veterans and retirees. And then, of course, always for active duty. And if you're a Guard or Reserve family, it doesn't matter what your duty status is. That's a really big thing for Guard and Reserve. Like if some benefits aren't available, if you aren't activated, our service is always available to you. It does not matter what your status is in the Guard or
That's
Reserve.
amazing.
So
it's really cool to hear because we like to connect, like Deployed Love is really big about like the mothers of can be part of it, the sisters. Like we want to support the whole family because there is quite a bit of support for military spouses, I think, out there. And like we were talking a lot of resources, but there isn't a lot of resources for military mothers and for their siblings and stuff. So like also it could be really cool for a deployed member to send to their mom as something, like a way to connect that way too. I mean, books can unite anybody. I think that as long as they're into reading, you could really make this work anywhere across the board.
But I loved how you said earlier, like even without kids, you would have just loved your husband reading to you. I mean, my husband was also deployed in 2012, and I think we could randomly Skype, but that was about it.
It was super random.
So
yeah.
And it would have been nice. Like, I mean, I still have voicemail saved on my phone that he would, like, if I missed a call, right? Like I would just save it so I could hear his voice. And I think, having those books to listen to, I wouldn't have cared what book it was, just to be able to see their face, hear their voice, that they're safe, that they're thinking of you. And when the service members make those recordings when they're gone, they love it. It gives them a few minutes to just not think about the fact that they are wherever they are in the world doing their job that they love, but it's a stressful job when you're away from home. And so if you can get those 5-10 minutes to just think about home, it's nice for them too, for their mental health.
I mean, can you imagine like Jeremy or Dustin like recording like Dr. Seuss, just something like super random, super fun, and you just like, I miss his voice. One fish, two fish, red fish. I would die like if that happened, and that would just, I think, that would give us something to talk about. Like, why did you pick that book? Why did you do that? Like you can easily utilize this no matter where you are in your military spouse journey, whether you have kids or not. Like I do feel like this is something that everyone can utilize. And I love how you can send it to anybody. Like I was just thinking like, oh, this would be great to like record books for our niece. So that way we can stay connected with her. We don't get to see them as often. She's still little, but if we happen to, PCS Oconus where we won't get to see her as often, we could at least send her books so she can still hear her aunt and uncle's voices. And I think that's a great feature that you guys offer that as well. Cause I think that helps us connect still to our families while we're on, army time or military time around the world. So
totally.
Yeah, I'm super excited to share this onto our page, and I'm definitely going to make sure that one of our graphics afterwards is about like being a spouse, because I think that a lot of people hear about United Through Reading, they're like, I don't like kids. Like, why would I do that? Like, but now the more I think about it, I'm like, this would be so cool. Like, I really wish I don't think that I really knew about it when we were that age, but I wish I had, because I would have kept those recordings till now. Like, these are things that I would have loved to have still had, and then be like, look, this was your dad when he was 19. Look at him reading this book. Like, it would just be such a funny memory to have, but just so sentimental too. Because those are things that you could even pass on, especially with them in uniform, pass on to grandkids to watch grandpa. Like, what a cool memory.
Yeah, I love it. Tell us how to use it. I want to hear about it.
I will definitely be downloading this as soon as we get off, because I'm super excited. Because we live overseas, and it is, like Ashley's saying, connecting the nieces and nephews. Like, they love Dustin. And when we go back, they're like all super excited to hang out with him. And now it's like, oh, maybe we can send, especially to the younger ones, for them to just have that connection with him would be really cool. Because the older ones have had lots of years with us, but the younger ones haven't. And so that would be a really, really cool thing. I'm excited to try it.
Yeah. And it's just like you said, it's a cool way to stay connected, and reading, brings people together. And so whether it's a sentimental book or it's something that they're super into right now, like, it doesn't matter. It's just that active reading that brings you close.
Well, thank you for coming and telling us more about it, because I've heard about it multiple times, like we were saying, but this is like the most like intimate discussion about how to use it, which is really cool. Before we let you go, I want to do what we usually do is we ask you as a military spouse, what would be your one key piece of advice to another military spouse? Can be a new one and one of us seasoned spouses, either way.
That is a great question. And like which piece of advice? I think just take it one day at a time and stay positive. It's really easy, and I'm guilty of it, to get bogged down in the craziness that gets thrown your way. But if you are able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, like this too shall pass and you will get through it. You are stronger than you think you are. And if you can keep even just a glimmer of positivity to get through the craziness, then you will make it through. And if you need to, like I said, you just have to make it through today, and then the next day you just have to make it through the next day. So that would be what I would say.
That's how I live my life anymore, because I feel like everything is like, what are we doing in 6 months? I don't know. We could be somewhere else.
Yeah, you don't know. And, I always think like it's your journey. It's not like you're not on anyone else's journey. Like I have friends that make the really crazy, cool care packages and it's all decorated. That's not me. You don't want me anywhere near like a hot glue gun. I mean, I have one, but you don't want to see it. So, if that's not your journey, it's not your journey. Just throw things in a box. That's what I did. They still will love you for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. They're probably not going to keep the box anyways. So to be honest, it's a cute surprise, but I mean, but yeah, I
Awesome.
agree. Love that. So that's all you can do. We have friends going through a lot of crazy PCSing coming up. I know that it's just hectic. So all you can do is just like one foot in front of the other. Just keep going. Yep. It's going to have to work out. It has to work out. It's the military. You can't just be nowhere. So
I mean, could you be in limbo? Probably, but you'll eventually land somewhere. Yeah. They'll find a spot for you.
They will.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for telling us so much about this. I'm going to make sure everything is in the show notes, including links to downloading the app and everything. And then if anybody's interested in downloading it, should be really easy for you to get a hold of. And we will have tons of information throughout the next couple weeks as this comes out for you guys to see. So thank you for coming on, Jessica.
Thank you guys. This was fun. I'll talk to y'all later.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. As we like to say, rock up, Buttercup.